Oasis, baby. We're cyber technologists.
Nice. So thanks everybody for joining. This is intended for auto dealers to learn about the new safeguards rule and what the Federal Trade Commission's expansion of that has entailed, because it applies directly to automobile dealers. They are named specifically in the regulation. And so we're here to learn what this all entails, really from kind of three perspectives is my goal. One is from the compliance perspective, which is sort of compliance / cybersecurity insurance perspective. And we have Rusty Goodwin and John Baston. Sorry, I didn't get his headshot in time. with the mid-state group, and they'll be our subject matter experts on the details of the law and what its requirements are. I'm Ron Shu. My company is called SIP Oasis, and we do cybersecurity and managed compliance as required by the FTC now. And then Pete Donahue is one of our favorite clients, who is a known guy around Alabama for Donahue Auto and Donahue Chevrolet, and he can sort of speak to what it's like to live through this from the standpoint of an auto dealer who's got a business to run at the same time. So this should be fun. It's not going to be going on for too terribly long. I promise we're not going to use any techno jargon or anything like that to try to baffle people or get you confused. We'll use real English words and everything. And then at the end, I actually have a special offer for any AIADA members that we have on the webinar here at the Alabama Independent Automobile Dealers Association. So stick around to the end for that. So without any further ado, maybe Rusty, why don't you kind of get us started here, because this is more of a top-down kind of initiative from the governmental standpoint and regulatory authority standpoint, more so than it's bubbling up grassroots. So how about let's start with you, and what is this thing? What all does it take? And then we'll just kind of go around like that and talk more.
All right. Well, I tend to find that people think my take on this is rather interesting, but I'm unoffendable. So if you roll your eyes at me, number one, I won't see you. Number two, and if I could, it won't make me feel bad. But really what I see with this FTC ruling that's coming down for, in this case, we're talking about car dealers, but really it's for any organization that handles financials, is opportunity for the end user, not burden. And I can hear the eye rolls right now. So I'll give you a moment to do that. Go ahead and roll your eyes. And now I'll explain myself. First of all, you got some good news a couple weeks ago. Ron, I think I emailed you right away that they've extended this for 6 more months, which doesn't mean we can do nothing for 6 months. It means we have real opportunity here to govern ourselves. And John Baston and I have this conversation with clients all the time. We've got these regulations from FTC coming down. And if you're a large auto dealer and you happen to have other functions that you do that require regulations, like maybe you have a self-insured plan where you have to ascribe to certain HIPAA regulations. Maybe you have car dealer customers who are who also have manufacturing businesses. Whatever kind of business, there are already frameworks of best practices that we need to follow. And what we tend to look at is the compliance side. Hey, the government is making me do this, or the auditors are making me do this, or my vendor contracts are making me do this, as opposed to looking at the risk that we're facing and then choosing to govern ourselves appropriately. Because if we take the opportunity to govern ourselves in a way that makes us more secure, compliance really becomes less of an issue. And the problem is, folks in Ron's position, John's position, and my position is we have to make sure we spend an appropriate amount of time educating our clients and our prospects, kind of like we're doing today, on what that risk really looks like, what it means for you if your strategies fail, what it means for you if the government. So I look at it like this. This FTC thing is a speed limit sign out on the highway, and I'm driving on the highway and it says 70. I might look at the foggy and the rain and the dark and decide to choose 60. Nobody's going to complain that I'm governing myself and driving slower. If, however, I don't know what the speed limits are in Alabama, if I'm driving 120, a nice friendly state trooper is going to come along and bring me into compliance and make sure that I'm obeying that speed limit, something that I should have been doing anyway. And so when I use the word opportunity, this is giving us an opportunity to do a lot of things that we should be doing anyway to protect our clients, protect their data, and protect, that business that you run is your golden goose. And enough fines or enough bad PR or enough a worse enough breach could kill the golden goose, and then you don't have to worry about compliance because you don't have a business. And that's about as far into fear mongering as I'm going to get. I was being extreme to make the point, but this FTC beautiful gift wrap package of regulations and compliance issues that we have to follow is really an opportunity for us to get our houses in order and protect ourselves, and more importantly, protect our customers. And if we can spend this call looking at it in that light, just humor me. If you don't agree with me, just humor me, and let's look at it in that light for this call. And maybe we can see some real concrete things that we can do to secure our homes, put those right layers of security on our businesses to make sure that we have the most aggressive risk posture possible.
And this surrounds sort of the designation of financial institution now, right?
It does. We've got two distinct kind of issues. One, size, the amount of data that you have. So if you have under 5,000 names in your database, there's a slightly less burdensome set of rules that you have to obey. If you have more than 5,000, it's a little more stringent, but it also crosses other industries. John and I have been targeting some of our clients that we need to educate, who are schools, healthcare centers, all kinds of industries that deal with schools that give out scholarships or financial aid. Well, now they deal with people's finances. So it is going to be an overarching, it feels like it's all resting right on the car dealerships, but that's because that's the business that you're in. But other people are feeling that same pressure as well.
Right. Some of the other ones are like, all CPAs are now financial institutions, and all mortgage brokers are now financial institutions. So this is a pretty wide sweeping broadening of that definition. How does insurance kind of fit into all of this? I mean, that's not really governmental, but which is the dog and which is the tail here?
Well, I'm sure that the folks on this call too have realized that how some lines of insurance have been more difficult to get or more expensive to get. And that really does play into the overall risk, or the likelihood that you're going to have to transfer that risk to the carrier. But this FTC, and John, feel free to help me out here. The FTC isn't really that far apart from a lot of the frameworks that we're already following. They've just kind of put a new name on it and put it in a different basket, tweaked the policies and procedures around it a little bit, and targeted certain industries with it. But if you're in an industry where you're following NIST, in some cases HIPAA, you're already really close to adhering to those best practices anyway. I always chuckle, not because I'm making fun of anybody, because I kind of feel bad for, you just kind of shake your head like the government's going around scaring the hell out of everybody. But again, it's stuff that we should have been doing all along anyway. So there's no need to panic if you're really doing it.
Yeah, from a perspective of insurance, you usually see insurance carriers who are paying multi-million-dollar claims at the forefront of making people compliant, maybe not from a regulatory perspective, but from their own perspective of not wanting to pay claims. And so here you're seeing in the FTC guideline specific elements, as they call it. These elements include MFA. Well, if you've had a renewal in your cybersecurity policy in the last basically year or two, say Travelers, I think started 3 years ago enforcing MFA. So you
Let
couldn't
me
even get
jump
a
in for
policy.
one quick.
Yeah.
Let me for one quick second. I try to have a habit of always defining an acronym the first time. So for anybody who's on here, MFA stands for multi-factor authentication, which is basically a combination of something that you know, your username and your password, and something that you have, such as your cell phone or something that's an independent way of doing it. And all of the cybersecurity, all the insurance companies now are requiring that globally across the board, even be able to qualify for that. And then the other thing that they mentioned real quick was this concept of a framework. And cybersecurity has only gotten more and more complex and more involved over the past years. And in order to help people like us make heads or tails out of it and keep up with all the changes, there are so-called frameworks that really smart people, really smart, nice people whom we appreciate, have put together for us, saying, here are the things that you need to do, and here's how you go about doing. So when we're talking about frameworks, HIPAA is sort of as a framework, but it's also a regulatory component. But that's kind of what we're talking about there. Okay, sorry, John. Carry on.
And John, Ron, that's good, Ron, because those frameworks really are just made up of a series of best practices of how we behave, how we manage our data, how we manage our organizations, how we manage our networks. And you're right. It is funny. Most of them are suggestions, even though you'll still get in trouble they want the end result and they're giving you great suggestions on how to get there. But the reason why we say framework too, and I'm just adding to your explanation, is that even the government understands that every single component of a framework isn't going to be appropriate for every organization. So that's where you lay that framework over your operations, decide which ones you can handle and which ones you cannot, document appropriately, and now you have your own set of best practices that you follow in order to achieve risk maturity. And again, the frameworks, to your point, Ron, are different with different industries. HIPAA has a different set of best practices or framework than NIST does, or than this FTC ruling does. And that's why they're trying to hone in on, in this particular case, the card dealers, hey, where are the most likely chinks in the armor? Because that's what we want to wrap some best practices around and prevent that from happening.
And is that kind of where they come in, where the whole thing starts, I guess, with the naming of a designated, what is it, profession? What's the term?
Privacy officer, a chief privacy officer.
Well, in this particular standard, it's
or
qualified individual.
Qualified individual. Those are the
individual.
words I was.
Yeah, and I read somewhere, I think it was like 3:00 in the morning, and I couldn't re-find it, but I think the NADA, National Autos and Dealers Association, was instrumental in getting some of the language out that you didn't need to hire a chief information security officer. Now, these are six-figure positions, or even a chief security officer. I read somewhere that an organization like the NADA was successful in getting that language out, and they have it as just a qualified individual, which definitely helps save these dealerships a lot of money, because if you were required by law to have a CISO, it would be very expensive.
So when I guess maybe let's get into what what are the actual requirements, so I'm an auto dealer, and doggone it, I'm going to be compliant, and I'm going to eat my vegetables and take my vitamins and brush my teeth and floss.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
So what all does that entail? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'll dive in on that, and I will just kind of circle back and say, why are we involved? You asked, what does an insurance guy have to do with all of this? Well, Rusty and I, yes, we have an insurance division, that's Midstate Insurance, but we really sit in the risk management realm. We are what we call chief risk officers. And if you look at big companies like Walmart or Boeing, they're going to have a VP level or an officer level that is a chief risk officer. And a lot of our small companies, when you say small, under 500 employees, they just don't have the resources, financial resources, especially, to have a chief risk officer. So we kind of fill that void. And insurance really is only 10% of that process. I got trained from a guy at not only Barclays, but also PetSmart. And they say, they deal with insurance, but and the amount of money that they pay and that risk retention is large, but they only spend less than 10% of their time in insurance. And so we need to think of that as well, as many of the laws or the regulations, and the FTC safeguard regulation is no exception, is that you will see risk management principles all over this regulation. And to set some of you at ease, is that really the regulation was first implemented in 2003. Yeah. And technically, if you really want to look at this, there's not a lot of difference. The concepts are the same, is that really you're supposed to have a written security plan already. And so if you already have a written security plan, check that off your list. You just need to update it now based on some of the requirements, or what we call elements within the regulation. You have to update that. You have to have a designated program coordinator in 2003. Well, now we're calling that a qualified individual. So a little name change. Hey, back in 2003, you were required to do a risk assessment. And so again, we're getting into this risk management language, this risk management process. You start a risk management process with identification, with a risk assessment. So if you guys are already doing a risk assessment now, you're already there. You have to do that as part of the update. Well, before, you had to ensure safeguards, adequate safeguards. Based on your risk assessment, you're supposed to control the risks that you find. So nothing changes there. You were supposed to oversee your service providers, just like you are in the new update. But you're also supposed to monitor and adjust and change as the risks change over time. And so what has changed? Well, if you're doing those really 6 things that I just mentioned, guys, you're already there. And with the update, now I'll kind of pause for a second and say, the 2003 edition was really supposed to be flexible. It was to let every dealership, hey, Pete Donahue has 2 locations or 5. And I didn't ask you how many locations you had, Pete, but if you've got 5 locations, well, you're going to have a different program than, say, someone that's got 30. Or someone maybe here in Lynchburg that's only got 1 location. It's going to be your risk management program is going to be commensurate with your size, data collection, resources, et cetera. Well, in this new iteration of the change, they're actually saying, you know what, we're going to make you all one size fits all. You're all going to have to meet some of these minimum standards. And it's going to be specific in the law what you have to deal with. One of the things I've already mentioned is multi-factor authentication. You have to have multi-factor authentication, and they define that. It's going to be specific in nature. It is going to be involved, guy. That's the only kind of bad thing, is if, even though we're getting 6 months, if you're just now starting, you're going to have to sprint like never before.
Yeah,
very
agreed.
Involved. And here's the thing: you cannot rely on Ron Shue to do all this for you. The law is specifically designed in its elements that we'll discuss, is that you've got to get HR involved. You've got to get a board involved if you have one. You've got to get upper management involved. If you think this is an IT issue and you can just delegate, or this is something you think you can delegate to a outside affiliate or vendor, the law is specific in saying you can, but you can't.
Well, and John, let me insert something here too, because Ron, one of your initial questions was, where does insurance come in on all this? Well, here's where it can matter. So some of these breaches that laws like this are trying to prevent, what John and I have seen in recent years is liability, or personal liability for these breaches, has now been able to pierce that corporate veil, and on a civil level, punitive and damages can be assessed on individual C-suite and board level members for breaches under either fiduciary care or duty of care. And so when you ask how that can involve insurance, well, it's going to obviously affect your cyber liability insurance policy. But now, if you need to be defended in the civil lawsuit, it can start impacting your directors and officers policy, or your errors and omissions, or professional liability. And the doctor's role, we call it malpractice, right? Any of those executive risk types of policies that now they're going to have to defend you in court, and you might have to start breaking out a personal checkbook. And we have seen that happen in recent years, where board members and C-suite level or officer levels have been held personally liable for data breaches under duty of care. So let's keep it in context here of why the details are awesome, but I always like to focus on why those details matter too. And it can really start messing with your whole bundle of executive suite insurance policies that you pay a premium for, literally and figuratively pay a premium for. So we want to make sure that, again, we're protecting the golden goose and those people who learn how to operate, who own and operate that golden goose.
Yeah. And so, looking at these elements, I'll kind of break them down into two parts, internal and external. You've got some internal responsibilities, but you also have some external. And internally, what Rusty just said, really this is going to be looked at from the board perspective. They're specifically saying in the regulations is that, you can designate an employee or someone in your payroll. You can also designate someone outside of your organization, whether an affiliate or a vendor, to be your qualified individual, but you still must have oversight from if you don't have a board, then it's it's the president, it's someone in charge from the VP perspective that is giving this person or company or affiliate oversight. And that, someone is validating or affirming that the very thing that this person is doing, whether internal or an external vendor, is following the guidelines set forth by the regulations. And really what they're also saying is that once a year, this person or affiliate or external vendor, they must report to the board or a board equivalent. And so let's just say Pete doesn't have a board. I think he does. He's fairly large. Let's just say Pete's in charge. He's the president and there's no board. Well, that person he designates must report back to Pete at least once a year with specific information. It's actually detailed within the regulation what that individual is supposed to report back to Pete with. And here's the thing, if you guys have an HR division, you're already dealing with FMLA, you're dealing with ADA, you're dealing with EEOC or Pregnancy Discrimination Act, anything that or OSHA is another one, is that no regulation can be fully adhered to unless you document. So with OSHA and EEOC, you are guilty until proven innocent. So document the snot out of this, because if anyone were to come in and audit you, they're looking for documentation. You can say all day long until you're blue in the face that you did X, Y, and Z, but if you haven't documented it, the government just doesn't care, and they want to see the documentation. So part of it, though, the regulation is actually saying it. They want documentation.
Well, and John, what I always say is you've got to. It's three things they care about. You've got to have the policies and procedures in place in the first place. Then you've got to train to those policies and procedures and continually improve on them. And then, as John said, you've got to document it. So I have three. I say, plan it, practice it, and prove it. That's what you really have to do to make sure that your risk posture strategy is a whole one, is a complete strategy. Plan it, practice it, and prove it.
Fellas, I'd say something else that needs to be brought up that's, I don't know that everyone understands that's in this industry. And that is, if you're not doing some of these things, you have some real business risks and some real problems that could emerge. I don't know if anyone that's on this webinars or, even will be listening to it in the future has experienced a ransomware event. It's not something you want to go through, and it could be extraordinarily disruptive. I know for a lot of businesses, some of the stuff that they've their spreadsheets, their customer database lists, their DMS if it's locally done on their own computer systems. There's a variety of things that you store and keep. And if you get locked out from it, then think how disruptive that'll be for your operations. It could just throw you in a tailspin for weeks. and set you back a long way, redoing a bunch of stuff that you've already done once. And if you're following this framework, it's most likely you have things in place that can prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
Right? Because someone's not going to, ransomware becomes a little more difficult when you have multi-factor authentication. It's a lot more difficult for someone that has a password to get into your system to just get in, if then they also have to have access to one of your employees' phones who they got the password from. You're just reducing stuff greatly when you do these things. And so I think a lot of this talk about compliance is, of course, on point. But the big point to bring up is, if you're not doing some of these things, you could be in a world of hurt, not just from a legal perspective, just in operating your business. It could be debilitating to not have access to some of this information. You get locked out, ransomware. Think if you have a breach, and now you have customers calling you, your phone lines are tied up. Your salesperson, your management is spending 3 weeks answering questions from customers about why, they got an email about such and such, and it could be just there's thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars being lost when your top people are spending their time, dealing with all these damages that are caused by not doing some of these things that really are kind of common sense things you need to do in today's IT world.
Yeah, and I love that, Pete, because people, whether you're in Florida or California with earthquakes, you got hurricanes down in Florida, we've got fires here in Lynchburg, we've got, windstorms that take down roofs. And so all these businesses across the country are doing disaster recovery plans. They know how tragic a fire can be. They know how tragic an arson can be, or a hurricane that basically flattens or tornado that flattens your commercial business. And so we plan for those things. We know how devastating it can be. And I think anyone that's had a hack knows firsthand how disruptive that is for your business. And really what a lot of these frameworks, or I should say regulations, are basically getting at is that you're pretty much going to get hacked.
Yeah,
we can do we're
some way or another. Yeah.
We're going to do the best we can. And there's all kinds of frameworks, especially in the DoD and getting into government agencies that they get into advanced pernicious threats. And they're basically saying, you're going to get hacked. And so what do you do? Well, even the smaller businesses, the FBI is basically saying, if they want to get in, they'll get in. Try to make it difficult for them so they'll move on. But if they really want to get in, they'll get in. So really the best practice is assume that you're going to have a hack, do a drill for it. And this particular FTC regulation is one of the elements within their regulation, states that you will have a written incident plan. Hey, you're probably going to get hacked, so let's prepare for it now. We know this is going to be disruptive. This is not going to go well unless you plan for it. And if you know your business is going to get hacked 6 months from now, what are we going to do to prepare for that? If we had a crystal ball and we knew we were going to get hacked 6 months, let's work backwards and see what are we going to do, and how do you practice, just like what you do with a fire drill or an earthquake drill, or now unfortunately active shooter drills. You're going to add your incident response plan for a hack into your already programming of disaster recovery. It's just one more element that unfortunately we're now having to add that you really are already prepared for. A lot of you guys, when we had all these active shooters across the country, and unfortunately we still do, you prepared for it. And so now this is just like what you're used to already, and it's not that difficult if you've been doing those other things. And Pete, thank you for bringing it up, because it is.
And what's so great about what Pete said is it kind of goes back to, hey, this is an opportunity we have now to behave properly. And I'm sure that we'll talk about potential fines at some point on this webinar. I hate talking about the fines, even though I think in this, John, you can they're quite significant. But the real cost is, to Pete's point, the disruption. The real cost is the PR. The real cost is the inconvenience. The real cost is the damage that can be done to your business. And so, Pete, you guys are kind of miles ahead because you're already taking the proper view of why this is important. The fines are nothing but the state trooper coming along after I've already made a bad decision.
And your guys,
what we want is the governance. What we want is the governance ahead of time to make sure that we're looking at the risk properly and not making those bad decisions to begin with.
And insurance is not the answer. It's the last line of defense. But if you're using that as your first line, you need to really focus on one of the FTC elements is doing a risk assessment. You need to, as a matter of law, and this hasn't changed from 2003, if you also are a dealership that has over 50 employees in the last 5 years, a lot of dealerships are going to self-insured benefit plans to help manage the ever increasing cost of health insurance. And so a lot of dealerships, almost every single one of them in my book of business has gone to self-insurance, and you have to be HIPAA compliant. And so as part of HIPAA compliance, by law, you have to do a risk assessment. So this is no different for you dealerships that are already doing that as part of your HIPAA compliance. And so as part of this law, you start with not only identifying who that qualified individual is, but you now have to get that individual to perform probably through someone like Ron, who's going to help you with a risk assessment. And it must be comprehensive in nature. And there's some specific guidelines on what they're looking at for that risk assessment. And it must be, if you have over 5,000 records, it must be written too.
Yes.
It must be written. What's that, Ron?
I think your insurance. And I think your insurance questionnaires are going to get to be real short for somebody that's an auto dealer. It's going to be, do you comply with the gate safeguards rule? Yes or no? Yes, you get insurance. No, you don't. And then as soon as you file a claim,
Well, you know what?
File a claim, they're going to want to see proof of your documentation that you were compliant with the safeguards rule whenever the breach occurred.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a very short conversation.
And I think that you're going to find them wanting to see that documentation, some of that documentation anyway, with your application, not just a yes or no. It's become almost a guaranteed claim loss for a carrier who writes cyber liability. So you're right. That is where it's headed from a carrier perspective. And I just want to point out, you have two insurance guys on this call who both just said insurance is not the answer. So I bet you that's the first time you ever heard two insurance guys say insurance.
Yeah, I don't call myself. So Rusty, I will correct you. I'm not an insurance guy. I'm a risk officer.
I know. I'm just trying to be
insurance
funny.
Guy.
I'm just trying to be funny, man. But John is right. That's just simply transfer any risk you might have. It doesn't reduce your risk at all. That's like paying for car insurance and thinking you're never going to get in a wreck. Well, that's absurd. Right. So
I'm going to get into real quick, because I know we have some time constraints here and we haven't hit the vendors, and there's some real key things I want to make sure every person on this call understands. So the risk assessment is number one. You got to do a risk assessment. Got to do that. You have some elements about multi-factor authentication, encryption, and you might want to get into that, Ron. But I really want to look at the overseeing of service providers, because this could come as a surprise to some of the dealerships out there, is that when you have service providers, and I get this a lot, actually, I just got it last week, and it's always irritating, is that a lot of dealerships think that when they hire a service provider like DealerTrack, or, there's a lot of them out there, that they're now responsible for their cybersecurity compliance, that they're now in charge. Actually, the law is specific. It says you, as a financial institution, are responsible for all of these regulations and requirements, specifically the elements. You must select and retain service providers that maintain the appropriate safeguards. So you can hire anybody you want, but you have to ensure that they are following the safeguards that you are supposed to follow, because if they have a breach and they are not following the guidelines per FTC, you'll be the ones who are responsible and fined. You're responsible by the law. And so you have
liable in court.
Liable in court.
Yes.
You cannot transfer your liability, just like you can't with Cobra. So those dealerships that are 20 or more, you might have a Cobra provider. Well, you can't transfer that COBRA liability to a third-party service provider, just like you can here. So one of the things that it says, and this is very key, you must require your providers by contract to implement and maintain safeguards. So think about all your vendors that you have, let's say DealerTrack as an example. You must enter into a contract with them that they will maintain and implement the same safeguards that you are required to. And then you must periodically assess your providers to ensure that they are following the guidelines under FTC, because ultimately you have to follow the guideline. And if you're going to transfer the data collection of this financial information that is protected by law, if you're going to give the storage of that data to a third-party provider, you haven't transferred the liability to them. You have to now make sure by contract that they're going to follow the safeguards, and then you must verify, trust but verify that they are going to uphold the same safeguards that you are. I actually have a contract of DealerTrack right here. It's very comical. They make it very, very clear that DealerTrack does not warrant the functions on the site, that any defects in or on the site will be, they do not warrant that it will be virus free or have any other harmful components. And they say the only remedy you have with them, if you find out that it has a virus or they've been hacked, it says your sole remedy for dissatisfaction with the site is to stop using it. They say specifically they are not to be held liable, and you will hold them harmless and indemnify them if there is any backlash against them because of a breach and that you're affected. So it's very clear in their contract that they're not responsible for viruses. And so this is going to be very interesting on how this is going to play out with some of these vendors of, are they even going to sign a contract by you that they're going to maintain and implement the safeguards? Now,
well, and that's why at the end of the day, Ron, you and I had this discussion about a month ago. At the end of the day, as the heads of companies, we own the risk. It doesn't matter who we try to farm it out to, who we try to transfer risk through via an insurance policy, what vendors we have. As far as the government is concerned, we own that risk. And it's up to us to make sure that we do the right things to mitigate and manage that risk. And there's not a check big enough you can write to not own that risk. We own it at the end of the day, Yeah.
Go ahead, Ron.
Go ahead, Ron.
I wanted to mention something back over to Pete, because I think, we all heard the collective sigh of relief when it moved from December 9th to June 9th. But my fear is that a lot of people don't realize how long it takes to do these kinds of things, because it's funny how, the best things come in small packages. Well, sometimes the things that take the longest to implement are the shortest, like MFA. That's an awfully easy thing to say, but when you're dealing with a network that's existed for however long the car dealership has been in business, there are generally some very fundamental things that are preventing you from implementing the safeguards that are now required. So, Pete, could you talk a little bit to that journey? Because I want people to understand that realistically, 6 months is still not enough time to get compliant. It just takes that long to do all of the things that it takes. It reminds me of the old Chinese proverb, when's the best time to plant a tree? 10 years ago. And when's the second best time to plant a tree? Today. So This is kind of where we find ourselves. So Pete, why don't you talk to that journey a little bit and how you strike that balance between achieving security, but still being able to operate a business? Because, there's nothing more secure than just turning all the computers off, right? But that's not realistic.
True. And that's not realistic. But on the multi-factor authentication, it was, few to several months to go through the process. Lots of different machines had to have stuff installed on them. You had to go through the process of setting up with whatever software provider is going to be managing the overall multi-factor authentication, stuff on the application on your phone, dual mobile or whatever it might be. So you had to get everyone to get installed on their phones. That took a long time. You had to get people familiar with what's going on with this. Then you had to get, okay, how am I supposed to do this again? They got to log into the computer, then they have to go to their phone, they have to go and accept the authorization. It's just, it's a hand-to-hand combat, person by person, getting all this stuff set up. And, do you have the wireless phone numbers for all your staff? As you add, do you have a process when you add people, getting them set up with it? It took a while, definitely. But like you say,
they all build on each other. So it's and then the employee training too is such an enormous part of that. You've actually been ahead of the curve on that one for quite a while with getting the security awareness training for your staff. What do y'all how often are you doing that now? And
well, if you think about it with your kids, right, and you want them to clean their room. Well, if every day you kind of say, all right, your room's not clean, I'm sitting here till it's clean it. And you come in the next day and it's dirty, says, okay, well, it needs to be cleaned by 8 o'clock. And you go in there every night, at 7:30. You're like, I'm just going to sit here until you clean it. You're going to clean it, right? You do that, for 2 or 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden, you don't need to go to the room anymore, right? The child kind of realizes the room is going to have to be clean, and it's just more painful to fight it than it is to just do it, right? And people joked for a while. We had vendors that would send emails, and our staff, we got calls, and they said, "Well, this hasn't been paid." I'm like, "Well, we haven't seen the bill." I said, "Oh, we emailed it to you." They go back and look and said, that looked like some kind of, phishing or, crap email that was trying to get me caught for clicking. Right. And just the vendor just didn't send an email that looked real, or, it just had some text and then had an attachment. And we're going to open up that attachment. They were terrified. Right. So we went through lots and lots of training, lots of testing, lots of phishing, lots of various stuff where we tried to get people to fail. And then after that, of course, you would explain to them, hey, this is where you failed on this. People did security awareness training and did those classes online. They did those every year. Well, we've got the point now that culturally within the dealerships, people talk about and they know, don't click on stuff. Don't click on links you shouldn't click on. Don't open up attachments you shouldn't open up. And when someone opens up a Pizza Hut personal pan pizza coupon for free pizza, and they realize they're on the list for people that fell for stuff, right? Then one of our guys he opened up that, and we were making pizza jokes with them for 3 years, right? And then kind of word spreads. Oh yeah, he fell for it. He clicked on the Pizza Hut thing. So when you do stuff like that, you develop a culture about protecting stuff, and the training generally is really good. So for your employees, one of the things you should pitch to them is this training is multi-purpose. It's not just about protecting the company's digital assets. It is also about protecting your personal stuff.
Yep.
Because this knowledge that these employees gain from doing security awareness training transfers beyond just the workplace.
Yeah.
Many of these employees, they have their Hotmail account on their home computer. Well, they don't click on stuff they shouldn't click on because they learned it from work. And now their personal computer doesn't get ransomware, and they don't lose all the pictures of their kids that they've been keeping on their computer. And a whole lot of other things, that might be on their computer too, that they want to protect personally. And they talk to their family members, they talk to their elderly parents. So it just creates a culture and it creates understanding of something that is universal and not as just something that's applicable in the workplace. It's applicable for any person, for just their personal activities with their phones and computers and that type of thing. So it's, we've found that it's been very successful and creating a really good culture. And to this point, knock on wood, we've been pretty successral at averting breaches and major issues.
I mean, I think you bring up a great point, because I'll go back to you here in just a second, Rusty. But the key is that culture, because it is a matter of generating a culture around security, and when you get used to it like that, it's not nearly as hard as it used to be or as it seems to be when and it takes the senior manager or the owner, or you have to have somebody at the executive level who is encouraging / enforcing that behavior. And that's what's been so great about the Donahue locations, is they're all in on it. They get it. Go ahead, Rusty. Sorry.
No, I was actually, every time Pete used the word culture, I just found myself nodding my head like a bobblehead, because that's what we go into our clients and preach, is not compliance as a service, but compliance as a culture, governance as a culture, and it's got to start from the top down, just like Pete was describing, so that everybody, there's a very real statistic out there that 75% of CEOs use applications that aren't approved by IT, because they don't think they have to go by the same rules as everybody else, right? But when we reverse that 25% that does comply is really setting the tone to have the right kind of culture at their organizations. And when you do that, and Pete, you guys are exactly right. I mean, when we work to do an initial assessment, just to kind of get a good snapshot in time of, all right, here's what your risk posture looks like now. Here's what we need to do to fix it so we can improve it. Just getting that usually takes 60 to 90 days. By the time, and I'm using terms half of which I don't know what they mean, so I'll let you translate. But cleaning up, to your point, cleaning up an organization's Active Directory. If their network has been around for years and years and years, only God knows right now the work you have to do to it to get it to a point where you can assess it. Things like that, so that you can get a clear snapshot and say, all right, this is what we look like right now, and then here's where we need to go. So you guys are right when you say 6 months is maybe not enough time. You're going to spend a third to half of that just figuring out where you are and where you need to go before you can even start making improvements. So as much as I with you jointly breathed a sigh of relief that we had more time, it was like just getting to stay on the execution for 6 months. You still know it's coming.
Yep. I forgot to mention early on, there is a Q&A button for those of you. If you'd like to ask a question of any of us, just type it into the Q&A of the Zoom chat, and then we will absolutely get it answered for you. Sorry, but carry on,
guys. Hey, Ron, here's a question. I know we've talked about this before in regards to HIPAA. What is the risk for a dealership that they will end up in regulatory hot water? Where's that risk come from? Because, I don't think the dealerships really understand. They think I'm small. I sell 100, I have 100 cars on my lot, or I've got 33 employees. I'm too small for the government to care. But what might be important for these people to understand is, how does the government learn that you are a target that they need to go after?
Pete, let me ask you a clarification on that question. Are you asking, and I heard the word HIPAA, are you asking specifically on HIPAA?
Oh, no, I'm talking about for this.
For this.
Yeah, there's probably some similarities, right? And how they go after HIPAA situations, HIPAA violations. I mean, how is this FTC thing going to emerge?
Well, John, I can speak to that up front, and then you can get more technical about it. Pete, both of those areas, both HIPAA and this, one thing the government has done lately is they have greatly increased the reward for whistleblowers. So if you have a disgruntled employee, whether it's HIPAA, FTC, NIST, or anything, that that will report you as having not secure or not following the proper guidelines, not meeting those regulations. They are rewarding those whistleblowers now with cold hard cash. And you have a whole breed now of attorneys that are actually putting out advertisements. Hey, if you've been fired and know that your company's breaking regulations, call me. I can get you a good payout. So the risk is a little bit greater than it used to be even a year and a half, 2 years ago. And it's not a shock to anybody that we've turned into an extremely litigious society. But then the other part of that is, to your point earlier, Pete, I mean, and you kind of brought up comparing HIPAA to this, but this happened actually the end of last week with a medical firm here in our town. An employee had access to data and was nosy about somebody she was mad at. So she looked up all her information on the medical center's database and started telling all her friends and neighbors. Well, they had all the protocols in place. They had all the security in place. They had all the things, but they couldn't stop a nosy person. So now this person's probably going to go to jail. Both medical entities that are involved are probably going to have to do some kind of a settlement. But now worse, the patients know that there's a probability that their data is not secure at this place. So it's back to your point about what kind of disruption are you willing to tolerate? Just so you don't have to push a couple extra buttons for multi-factor authentication or a virtual private network or a vendor contract. What kind of disruption are you willing to take? And again, we at some point need to focus on the fines, but I would still bring it back to the damage it can do to your business. Now, the fines can be, and John, I know you looked up the fines on this FTC thing. What are some of those fines for this FTC?
It's about 43,000. I think it's either 43 or 45. I was looking at various different aspects of the FTC, and so one was 43, one's 45. Doesn't really matter. It's let's say 45,000, and so it's a lot of money. And just to kind of dovetail on what Rusty was saying, how is the government going to find out? So one is you got people who are in your organization, people within your organization are accessing information that they shouldn't. They're using that information to hey, I found out this guy had a bankruptcy 5 years ago, ha ha ha, or hey, I found out this guy's got a lot of debt. And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We get access to a lot of financial information, a lot of information as a car dealership, and how that information is accessed internally could get you in trouble just by, breaching that, and now that getting around town, et cetera. So the other part is you get a hack. And so a hack is a double-edged sword. It's really bad. It's a blade on both sides. You've got the hack itself, and Pete kind of went into, hey, if you get hacked, your business is disrupted. Now it's known around town that the client's data has been accessed, it's been breached. We've got to send out notifications. We got to worry about identity fraud, identity theft, that kind of thing. I've got all these expenses. I've got to fix all my servers and computers, and it's just a mess, and it's a major distraction. Well, every state law and federal law, FTC, says that you got to notify the appropriate authorities. And so as part of your incident response plan, you have to make sure that, just like with OSHA, when someone gets injured or a specific type of injury, you've got to call OSHA with a certain amount of hours. I think it's 8. And so with this, you've got a certain amount of time that when you look at any state or federal law, you're going to have to notify the appropriate authorities. Well, guess what? You just invited the government in to verify that you were following all of the state and federal laws that you were supposed to deal with. So not only are you dealing with the hack itself, but now you got an auditor in there who's trying to make sure that that you're compliant, that you did everything that you were supposed to do. And if you didn't, now you've got that problem. So let's just don't get hacked if you can help it. But, with advanced pernicious threats out there, and really what I'm talking about with APTs is advanced pernicious threats. That's, you've got Russia going after Ukraine, and you could get caught up into that net. You're an innocent bystander. getting caught up in a worldwide hack against Ukraine. And if you get, if you're into that, what can you do? If someone wants to get in, they're going to get in. Someone, if they really want to target your business, they'll get in.
Even to add on to that too, now at least Lloyd's of London in 2023, they're excluding any activities of nation states. So
yep.
If to use your example, if you get hacked and as soon as they find out that it was Vladimir on the other end of the keyboard, then sorry folks, we're off the hook. Thanks for all those premiums though. Have a nice day.
Well, and then Ron too, the notification cost isn't, you don't just have to notify the government depending on the size of the breach, how much data they get, what data they get. You may have a cost to notify every individual on your database as well that you got breached. And in some cases may have to remedy that by things like giving them LifeLock for a year, some kind of ID protection. So now you've got the cost of making the customer whole as well. In this note. So now you don't have just the government that you've had to tell on yourself. Now you have to tell on yourself to your customers as well. So,
and the judge.
And the judge. Yeah.
I mean, that's the other one I was going to add, is the whole reasonable, good faith efforts as a bellwether now for being in a legal case. Can you defend the position of the steps that you took as the business owner to protect your clients?
Documentation, absolutely. There's a difference between record keeping and documentation. And so when you look at all these laws, whether it's EEOC, FMLA, COBRA, and OSHA, all of these laws, there's a difference between record keeping and documentation. Documentation is proof of life. Documentation is the day-to-day, hey, you got MFA? Let's document that. Who do you have? What do you do? Have you gone through and verified that people are using it? Because, especially all it takes is one person. It's usually that CEO, VP, or someone who's an owner who says, well, I'm not going to do that. Well, not only are you breaking the law from an FTC perspective, but also you just voided the warranty or contract of your insurance policy. And this just happened with Travelers a couple months ago, where it was a huge claim, and it was a $2 million claim. They totally denied it because they found one person wasn't using MFA, and guess who it was? It was one of the owners. And so now it gave them a reason to deny a claim.
And what's so awful about that, John, that story is, the company was paying for multi-factor authentication. They subscribed to it. It was installed, but they couldn't honestly document that they were enforcing it. And that's what the auditors and the insurance companies care about, is that enforcement of that, making it part of your culture, right? Making sure everyone plays along. And it was one guy who thought he was too important to click one more button that cost him $1.9 million. So it's a shame.
Wow. That's a great fantastically terrible way to kind of bring it home. But as we're kind of running out of time here, then we don't have any real questions from the floor per se, but I wanted to say real quick for those who are members of the AIADA, we have a special offer. So part of what is one of the requirements of the safeguards rule is this risk assessment that John and Rusty have talked about. And that consists of some interview tabletop type of exercises, as well as some technical assessments. And we have a penetration testing tool that's basically a defanged hack kind of tool that lets us get a hacker's eye view of what a client's network looks like. In short, it lets us give them a snapshot of what their reality looks like. If I were a bad guy and I landed in your world, how bad could I ruin it? And we normally charge $997 to run this scan for any members of the AIADA. If you'll send me an email to rshu@sipoasis.com, it should be up on the screen with that subject, AIADA, in the subject line. We will give you a discount of $497 to have that scan, and a full review of it with me online. And then the first person who sends me this email with this, I'm going to do it for them for free. I only have a limited number of these that I can do, but we're new partners, vendor partners with the Independent Auto Dealers Association. So we want to kick things off with a splash. So we're trying to do that to help people out. So, Rusty, John, and Pete.
I'll just say, Ron, it's important to have something like that done because no one can proofread your own work, right? So even if you're very secure, even if you've got a very robust IT posture, it's impossible to proofread your own work. We had something similar done, and we're very strict. And we even found a couple of gaps in ours that, because we're in it day to day, it took an outsider to help us find it. So I would highly recommend getting a bird's eye and outside view. It's like having a cobweb in your house. You don't notice it for 6 months because you're so used to it. And a visitor comes over and goes, "Oh, good God, they have a cobweb and they're right in the front door." So a pair of guest eyes to really help you see. So that's a great offer.
That's called a wife.
Yeah, right.
I will say this, as we're dealing about the Auto Dealers Association, they have a lot of wonderful resources at the national level. The NADA, go to they have a dedicated splash page for the safeguard rule for members. They do have some free resources. One of them that I really liked was a way to contact their lawyer and ask a question. And so, instead of maybe reaching out to your own lawyer, go up to the ADA National. I think it's nada.org. I actually tried to find the page right before this session. I couldn't find the exact page, but somewhere last night I saw that you could ask their lawyer a question. You can get some written, kind of a sample document, written information security document. It's a starter, and they say that it's a starter, but it's a starter. And so you get that for free if you're a member. If you're not a member, it's $89. And they have some other resources there that's worth looking at, and I would advise you to do so.
Yeah, and I would agree. Unless Ron and Pete haven't told us about their entire lives, I don't think any of the four of us is a lawyer. So I would definitely get with one and make sure that they're overlooking kind of your risk posture as well. And I'll speak for myself, but if your lawyer tells you to do anything different than I've told you to do, listen to your lawyer. Don't listen to me.
Right. Well, Pete, I want to thank you very much for contributing to this too. You have any parting words of wisdom for the group?
I mean, really, the main words of wisdom are just because you don't have something now, today's a good day to start, right? Because it's very possible that if you get started now, your risk that might pop up and hit you might not happen on June 9th, right? It might happen on August 9th. So if you start now, it's going to take you 8 months. Maybe you're done in time for the time that something does hit you. So there's,
and every step along that path leaves you better off too.
Actually.
Yeah, start where you are.
Better off from a business perspective.
Yeah, just start where you are. Just don't stay where you are.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I can't think of a better way to wrap it up. Then that's a great quote to end on. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for helping to shed some light on all of this, and then to all of our attendees, thank you very much for joining. And email me if you are interested in the offer here, or if you just have any other questions, and we'd love to chat more about it. And we'll be doing more of these as well. So stay tuned. And, thanks everybody for joining.
I fell prey to hackers a short time ago when I clicked on a link from my old buddy Joe, and then my computer did rumble and roar. Oh no, I've been ransomed by hackers once more, and it's no, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more shall I fall prey to hackers. No, never, no more. I curse my IT guy, that blithering clown has got my whole business completely shut down. I called him, got voicemail, his greeting did say that he's out on vacation for several more days. And it's no, nay, never.